I think if there's one thing that Canon probably suffers from is that their RF lenses are comparatively expensive compared to E-mount counterparts, and the selection is more limited. It's changing and it's getting a little bit better, but still, they are amazing lenses. They are really optically perfect, but they really targeted the high end more.
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome everybody to episode 21 of CineD Focus Check podcast. Today I'm with Jeff Loch, one of our esteemed writers, live from Lyon, France. How are you, Jeff?
Doing awesome. What about you, Nino?
I'm also doing well. It's been an exciting week of announcements, actually. Yesterday, on Wednesday, we had the announcement of 2 new Canon cameras and a new DJI product. And I think we should dive right in and start with the Canon cameras. I actually asked you to come onto this podcast because you are a Canon shooter. You're very experienced with Canon cameras, and I wanted to have your opinion on the new releases. Now, first we had the Canon EOS R1, which was I think, a very long anticipated camera. I think there was a development announcement of that camera months ago, which we reported about. So people knew it was coming, they just didn't know when. But also, Canon released the R5 Mark II, the second generation of their very popular mirrorless camera, which I think was the first, correct me if I'm wrong, mirrorless from Canon that was able to record raw video internally.
I think you are correct about it.
Yeah. So what's your take? I mean, first of all, we recently had the C400, which we can touch on later as well. Canon has been not very active with releases over the last year or so, or years maybe. So everybody was anticipating them to come out with a lot of stuff, and now we have it. Where would you put... Well, what are your first thoughts on the R1 and the R5 Mark II?
Very true. Canon focused on the APS-C lineup last year. And now they are finally releasing the flagship EOS R camera that everybody was waiting for, the R1, because the R3 that was released 3 or 4 years ago, like when they released the R3, they said it was not the flagship camera that everybody was waiting for, in a way. And it's nice that they are finally coming out with the R1 just before the Olympics that are starting next week. Really incredible camera, new sensor, new imaging processing. Basically, they are really targeting like high-end photographers, sports photographers. The R1 is not much aimed, I would say, at filmmakers and content creators. And that's why I guess they are coming out with the R5 Mark II at the same time.
You mentioned the R3 and that not being, at the time already, they said it's not going to be the flagship because the R1 is coming. Now we can look at the differences between those, and as you said, I think I agree. It's not. I think neither of these cameras are really focused at filmmakers. The R5 is. I think they probably think back to the original 5D Mark II or 5D in general mirror DSLR camera, and because the name is similar, probably they just want to keep it that way, and having the R5 Mark II also be the one that is more targeted at filmmakers. Now the R5 Mark II shoots up to 8K in 60 frames per second. It has a higher in raw video, which is insane. There were overheating issues with the original R5, if you remember, which I think were partly ironed out after some firmware upgrades, but not really. I tested the original version and I really had issues with it shooting the full res. So let's see how it goes with the new one. It is still a small body, so there will be a lot of heat generated in that body if you shoot 8K 60 FPS
I think they learned their lesson here, because there is also a new accessory for the R5 Mark II, a battery grip with a cooling fan inside. Like, they released 3 different battery grips, one regular one with a 2.5G Ethernet port, and one with a fan. So I think they learned the lesson here with like all of the noise that was made when the R5 came out, and kind of a bad buzz in a way because of the overrating issues. So I really hope that the R5 Mark II, at least with the battery grip, won't overheat, at least not as fast in a way as the original R5.
Well, and the manufacturer should know better of how to cool the camera, right? Because we had third-party solution, I think from Tilta and some others that were trying to address this, which were helping in some way, but people were still running into that issue. But
I mean,
yeah.
Canon are not the only one having that problem. Like, cameras are becoming smaller and smaller with more tech inside. Like, Sony has the same issues too.
Yeah. But we only have Canon actually recording. I mean, Sony doesn't do RAW internally with their cameras in general, with the exception of the high end. But, you know, of course, I mean, the data rates are just insane that are required for this. I mean, 8K, 60 frames per second in a mirrorless camera is something I would never have thought possible at all. But so that's the resolution of the R5 Mark II. The R1 has 6K, 60 frames per second, up to 60K. So it's a lower res, because it's a lower resolution sensor. The R1 has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, and the R5 Mark II something like 45 megapixels. So that is really the high resolution thing. And they're really targeting, like you said in the beginning, with the R1, they really are going after sports photography. So it's about doing as many photo shots per second as possible, which is of course perfect for the Olympics that are going to, actually going to start in your backyard in Paris very shortly. So the R1 can shoot up to 40 shots per second, like photography, like photo shots, whereas the R3 can do up to 30 shots. They both have a 24 megapixel sensor. The R1 has something new, which is called in-camera upscaling. So the photos can be upscaled, I think, up to 4 times or something like that.
Yeah, you can go close to 200 megapixel with the upscale. It's 196 or something like that. It's crazy big.
It's an interesting option, of course, to have that in camera. I don't know what the advantage is of doing that in camera as opposed to on a computer. I mean, you as a photographer could deliver those high resolution shots to your editor already. I'm trying to think why you would need that.
I mean, for high-end product photography, it can be useful instead of going for, let's say, an Hasselblad or...
Yeah, but
I don't know.
Why would you... Yeah, I mean, you could do this on the computer too. I mean, maybe some people can charge more with higher resolution photos. I don't know. It's like... Yeah, but
I mean, it's always... I see it like that. It's always faster and easier if you can do it in camera. You save time and post-processing time.
That's true. Well, that, and it also puts more control again into the photographer's hand in this case. Yeah, so R1 really targeted at photography, but it has those 6K 60p video functions as well. Well, now what's really cool with both the R1 and the R5 Mark II is that Canon says those are the first EOS cameras ever that allow you to shoot video and photos really at the same time. Meaning you're shooting video and you can actually shoot uninterrupted stills, which are not frame grabs. They're making a point that it's not a frame grab. Now, that's going to be interesting. I mean, we've only really seen the presentation here. I'm not sure yet whether that means you can shoot at a different shutter speed. I wouldn't know how that would work. Because if you're shooting at a 50th of a second, your video, 50th of a second shutter speed, how would you do like a 200ths of a second photo. Maybe you could. I don't know.
Double shutter speed thing. I don't think you can. I guess it's the same aperture and shutter speed.
For sure. The question is, I'm not so sure about the shutter speed, but I guess it's going to be the same as well. But still, I mean, it's going to be the full resolution thing. I think it's going to be JPEGs though. It's not going to be the RAW, but still, I mean, that's really, really useful.
I mean, to be honest, I was more curious about that feature compared to the in-camera upscaling thing. I was more like, who actually does that?
It's gonna
at the same time, because you have a risk of, like, if you're, for example, if you're shooting on a tripod and if you press the shutter release at the same time, you have a risk that the camera will have a slight jiggle. I don't know. I was really curious about that feature.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, something I definitely want to test as well. I mean, it does have, I think they have in-body stabilization, right?
Yeah, so they improved it up to 8.5 stops.
Yeah, so it should be able to kind of mitigate that movement. But that's definitely a feature, man. I always used to say to people when I gave workshops and stuff, like, don't sell yourself as a video and photo shooter on the same job, because it's not working. I mean, like, you know, like people who want to just imagine a wedding and then doing both of the video and the photos, it's always going to be a compromise, and it's never a good idea, because you need different stuff for photos, you need different poses, you need different movement. All that stuff is very different, and kind of mixing the two is difficult also because of the technical limitations that you have.
Yeah, I already saw people during weddings doing both at the same time, and I was really concerned about the results, because I was seeing the guy like grabbing a shot, filming it, and when he was done, he was quickly switching between photo and video mode, and he was like,
it's always a compromise.
Wow. And I was like, dude,
well, the problem always is you need to focus on the key moments, and especially the wedding, that's crucial. Again, that's the same for sports, of course, but if you are able to just roll the video, and just while you're doing that, because you're kind of like documenting what's happening and you don't know when exactly something, you know, it's not scripted, then it does make sense to just kind of press the additional shutter button to get a full res photo. I think that's maybe now with a camera, like with cameras like these, because that's working for both the R1 and the R5 Mark II, that can change a lot of things for a lot of people. I think it's like you said, I think also it's a much more important feature if it works. I think it can make a big difference for a lot of people. So that's going to be very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. In run and gun situations, I didn't see it like that, but you're very correct. That can be very interesting in a documentary setup, to while you're shooting I don't know, a very interesting shot handheld, to grab pictures at the same time. That's very true.
It's going to be interesting how many of those, I mean, you're not going to be able to, it's going to be interesting how you're going to review the photos, right? Because you're still rolling video. So you shoot, usually you take a photo and you look at the photo. You take, even if you do bursts, you just flip through them and check them. You can't really do that if you're still shooting video. So it's kind of like hit and miss. You take a few photos. It's going to be interesting to see if they implemented it in the software that you can actually get a preview while you're still shooting. I don't know. But it's going to be a compromise for sure. And it's also a focus issue in terms of not the focus of the camera, autofocus, more like the focus of the photographer, because I still think you can't focus on two things at the same time, especially we men cannot. So I think it's going to be interesting. But it's a cool feature for sure. Yeah, but let's move on to so those are, the main difference between R1, R3 is really more shots, 40 shots per second with the R1, 30 with the R3, and more video functions in the R1, which are 6K 60p RAW, which we also had with the R3, but now this one also does 4K 120p with audio, and that's also true for the R5 Mark II. Which is cool. I don't think there's a crop though. Do you know? Is there a crop if you do that? No crop?
I don't think so. it's very rare in Canon cameras that they crop when you drop down the resolution. So I don't think both cameras would crop the sensor to go
with
in
some
4K
cameras, there's I
120.
don't know about Canon cameras, with the Sony, sometimes a tiny crop, and then but it looks like it's gonna be the full resolution. And they both support Canon Log 2 and 3, whereas the R3 only supported Canon Log 3. Tell me about that. Is Canon Log 3 older than Canon Log 2? It's confusing me.
Actually, Canon Log 2 was released first. No, I mean, first they came out with Canon Log, then Canon Log 2, and Canon Log 3 was the latest one. So Canon Log 2 gives you the most dynamic range out of the free log options. Actually, the original Canon Log is not often very used. It's kind of an OG Canon Log format. So people are mainly shooting Canon Log 2 or Canon Log 3. Canon Log 3 has a little bit more contrast and saturation, and it's an easier log profile to work with. Whereas Canon Log 2 gives you really the most dynamic range, but it requires a bit of work in post to get a good starting point. You need to denoise the footage and stuff. I mean, you also need to denoise it a bit in Canon Log 3, but so you can get in and out much faster with Canon Log 3 than Canon Log 2.
Interesting. Okay, so it's different from the Sony, where the S-Log 3 is less contrasty than S-Log 2. It's kind of vice versa. So they introduced Canon Log 3 to have a more contrasty version again. Okay. Yeah, I understand. Okay, now basically the introduction of the older Canon Log 2 with the new cameras means that now you can have a wider dynamic range, I guess, on those cameras.
Yes, you can. Like that's a request from a lot of users to have access to Canon Log 2 to get the most out of the sensor. So it's a nice addition. If you really want to work with Canon Log 2 to at least have that option, it's a nice addition, and it's a smart move from Canon to try to implement features from the Cinema EOS lineup into their mirrorless cameras.
Yeah. Let's move on and talk about the new autofocus function in both new cameras, which at least on paper sound really exciting. Now, first of all, they have a mode, this is for photography only, the first one. It's called Action Priority. It identifies action unique to sports events and moves the autofocus point to that subject. High-speed detection and identification of multiple people, status of joints and ball positions at speeds of up to approximately 60 frames per second, and it automatically determines the main subject and action poses. It's perfect for, they say, football, soccer, basketball, and volleyball. So that's kind of crazy. So it's kind of an AI autofocus that realizes which are the coolest movements of people, like standing in midair, hitting the ball or something like that. That, of course, perfect timing for the Olympics. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of photos where this is going to be demonstrated with the new cameras. What do you think about it?
I'm not shooting a lot of sports, so I'm not specialized in that field. Anyway, like Canon is really pushing their autofocus technology, which is one of the best out here since the C100 Mark I days with the dual pixel AF and stuff. And now they are pushing it even further with more modes, and it's smarter than ever. It can really accurately and at speeds that are blazing fast, like see what the action is, lock on it, and basically do all of the work for you very accurately. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think for those action moments in sports specifically, I think one of the crucial things is not to focus on the wrong person because it's so fast. So if there is any AI function, I mean, everything is called AI now, but it is, I mean, it's probably like machine learning based stuff that's built into the camera that kind of supposedly recognizes where the main point of action is, which can make a huge difference, I think, for sports photographers. So looking forward to seeing photos from that. The other thing they introduced is, we had this before. I think it's called eye control autofocus. So basically, depending on where you're looking inside your EVF, it would like you look at your iris and then focus where you are looking. So it's a little bit what, like Apple is doing with the Vision Pro, where you're selecting stuff by looking at it. So they're doing that for focus. And I think that has been there before. So they say it's improved now. It's more reliable. It's also for photography only. That's important to note. Unfortunately, that could be something that's cool for, documentary video as well, or any kind of sports as well. But still, I mean, it's really cool. It has a larger eye detection area now, so I guess you can look around more. And it's twice as fast, so I guess it's reacting faster. So that's going to be interesting to try out as well. And
yeah, I had the chance to play with it once with the R3, and I was really confused by it because it's not like it's a new way of working, because you look somewhere like in the EVF and the camera automatically focuses on it. And at first it's really confusing because you're like, what's happening in there? The camera really knows where you're looking at and focuses on it. It's an incredible technology. It takes a bit of time to get used to it, but once you're like learning how it works and get used to it, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, it sounds very intuitive in a way when you get used to it. The question is, how do you actually look at the settings of your camera if they're like on the corners of your screen, like like inside the EVF? You look at like, oh, what's my resolution? And you look there, and then it just focuses on something at the border of your image.
It's interesting because when you look down at your settings, the camera doesn't focus at the bottom. It kind of knows that you are looking at your settings. I don't know how.
I guess
but
you
it
have to blink
doesn't shift focus.
Yeah.
It just stays where it was. And when you look back up, it will focus where you want it to focus.
Very cool.
It's a very impressive technology.
Very nice. Looking forward to trying that out as well. Very exciting. And last but not least, and actually most importantly for us video shooters, is a new function called Registered People Priority. So I think there was something like this before, but now it has improved face recognition. So basically it recognizes faces in your shots and you can register them. So I think what it does, correct me if I'm wrong, you record a clip, it recognizes all the faces that are inside that clip or several clips, and you would just get a little bit of a list of those faces, and then you can either memorize them or delete them. And then when you do memorize them, you can select like, I want to focus on face number 3 in your list for the next stuff that I'm filming or taking photos of. And then it will just stay locked on that face with the autofocus, which is really cool. I mean, it's kind of like, we had a register. I know it from Sony cameras. We had this, they introduced this registering faces autofocus, I think with the FX9 originally, and was brought down to a lot of other cameras as well. The only thing is you can't really memorize a face in terms of like, like between clips and stuff like that. You can kind of lock on it and it will remember it even if it leaves the frame. But as soon as you kind of shoot something else, it will have forgotten that face. With a Canon camera, it can remember those faces and hopefully recognize them again even if the light changes. That's the question. But I'm sure in the same setting, it's not going to be a problem. And then you can just lock on that person, right?
You can register up to 10 different faces, if I'm correct. And I guess it will work a little bit like what was used to be called face priority. I guess they changed it with the C400. They changed the naming, but it's basically the same. So I think the camera will just focus on faces normally, but as soon as someone that is registered in your camera shows up in the frame, he will have the priority, which is an interesting feature. I'm not sure how people will use it, or if they will really take the time to register different faces in camera.
Yeah.
But at least you have that option. And one thing which is really nice with Canon is that they often like develop new features and see how people like them. And in the next generation, they either keep it or remove it. So it's interesting to at least have that option and see how users what they will do with it.
Yeah. I see here, it looks like it can only register people based on photos that are on the cameras, not videos, but it can probably also apply it onto a video.
I think it works a little bit like when you are browsing in your photo library on your iPhone, you can search pictures by people, and the iPhone like automatically analyzes your pictures and the people in there, and you can search by people. And I think they are doing something a little bit similar to it.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. I mean, also, I think if you're shooting celebrity, I mean, even in these football games, you want to be like, I'm the shooter for that person. I want to really be on whatever football player, and then you're you're the photographer. I don't know if they probably don't have that, but like in case there is, just this focus on these 5 people or something like that. That's useful. Or celebrities, if you're on a some kind of event, can make sense. Even if you can load a photo of that person into your camera before they show up, could be useful. In general, the autofocus, they now call it dual pixel intelligent autofocus. It used to be called dual pixel CMOS AF2. I think that was the last one. They say that the tracking has evolved. So now it's when a subject is crossing, it's not as easily losing the focus as before, which is very useful, something that I've been struggling with many times before. And also when only the upper half of a body is visible, it's enough for those for the dual pixel intelligent autofocus. And it says avoiding obstacles by estimating head area. I don't know what that means, but I guess if something is in the shot. Yeah, and then we already talked about action priority and register people priority.
The autofocus of their EOS R cameras is just getting better and better, and it's honestly one of the best out there. I'm not saying that because I'm a Canon shooter, but it's really incredible, and I would love to see them move some of that autofocus technology to the cinema EOS lineup much faster, because it's sometimes crazy that when you are shooting with an EOS R5 that it's just doing a better job than, let's say, a C70, for example, because the autofocus technology is working differently. But it's in video mode on a Canon mirrorless camera, the autofocus is crazy good, and it's really hard to beat it in a way, or to lose focus and, you know, get your thing wrong.
Yeah, I mean, autofocus has come such a long way over the last few years. It's something that we didn't even consider using for video, and now it's almost like incredible that that we've used to work without it. And I think it's become, for me, it's one of the main reasons, and I think the manufacturers, especially Sony and Canon, but also Fujifilm and so on, they realize that it's become one of the main reasons why you even buy their lenses, because you can use most old lenses with their newer cameras, which are still great lenses, but usually the adapters don't allow for proper autofocus, so you will have to invest them into native glass in order to get that. And I think if there's one thing that Canon probably suffers from, is that, and that also already leads me to the next point, it's that their RF lenses are comparatively expensive compared to E-mount counterparts, and the selection is more limited. It's changing and it's getting a little bit better, but still, they are amazing lenses. They are really optically perfect, but they really targeted the high end more. And that means it doesn't leave you a lot of budget options, quote unquote, as opposed to where with E-mount you have a lot of other options. And the other thing is, of course, Canon was so late to the game with the RF mount that, I mean, me included, right? I used to shoot on the C300 and then I upgraded to FS7 at the time because it took them too long to come out with an upgraded version of the C300, and then it was comparatively too expensive in comparison to what Sony was offering. Now, Canon traditionally always had more expensive cameras. And then at that time, and I know that's true for many thousands of people for sure, that they switched over to Sony, whereas now, like if you're talking about, I don't know how it is in France, but over here, and I know in general in Europe, there's a tendency from broadcasters when shooting large format or, you know, like full frame, it's now Sony. It's almost like a requirement that you have a Sony camera or they have a Sony camera, and like for broadcast documentary stuff, which is kind of sad that it's become like that it's just like only Sony. And I think it was mainly because of Canon was too slow in upgrading their own cameras, and then they were at the time too expensive. Now, many years have passed, and now we have recently the announcement of the C400, and now the R1 and the R5 Mark II, all of which don't seem really expensive. Quite the contrary. I mean, the C400 is amazingly cheap. It's what, $8,000 or euros for a camera that can shoot what, 6K? Is it 6K? 6K 60 with internal RAW. I mean, there's if you look at Sony, doesn't have anything to compare. We have the FX6 is a similar price point, but it's only 4K and it doesn't do RAW internally. And yeah, admittedly, it's not a new camera anymore. It's now what, 4 or 5 years old. So 4 years, I guess. It's become very popular, but it's amazingly underspec'd compared to the C400, which is now suddenly Canon. I mean, if Canon would have charged, you know, something like 12,000 for the C400, nobody would have blinked either. You know, like, and we would not have been surprised. But now basically what they're doing is, I mean, they have a camera which many of the specs are actually more equal to something like the Burano, with a triple base ISO that doesn't even, you know, it's not even there with Sony. So, I mean, it's cool. Competition is good for us users, because they will have to up their game. Like Sony has to really up their game now. However, maybe Sony is a little bit more relaxed because they have such a huge chunk of the market already. And it's very difficult for people to get out of this because they already are invested in in these lenses, right? So what's your thoughts on this?
I would be a little bit more kind towards Canon when it comes to that, because their starting point when it comes to lenses compared to Sony I mean, when they introduced the original EOS R camera back in 2017, 2018, probably, maybe before that. I don't remember exactly the exact release date. Anyway, they already had a huge lineup of EF lenses. So they knew that it was gonna take time to release RF lenses. So they immediately came out with the RF to EF adapter that works just incredibly well. It doesn't even feel that you are using an adapter. It just feels like you're using a native RF lens, and it's really hard to see a difference. So the strategy was different because Sony didn't have any E-mount lenses when they introduced the system. Like, they didn't have any lenses that you could adapt in a way to the
they didn't have DSLR lenses,
ecosystem.
Yeah.
If you get my point here. So the starting point was really different. Canon is really taking their time to release lenses, but like to this day, some of the lenses they released, for example, the 24-70 f2, nobody was able to create such a lens to this day. Even the 24-105 f2.8 LIS, like the power zoom, it's one of a kind lens. Nobody did that. So they are taking their time, but they are really delivering. They start to release more affordable lenses like the 45 f1.4. But yeah, I agree. Like, for a couple of years, Sony really had an edge, a clear edge. And if you go to most rental houses, they have dozens of FX3, FX6, FX9 cameras, and not many Canon options. So Canon really has to do some work here and come up with solutions. Like, they started to open the lens mount recently with Sigma releasing RFS lenses for APS-C cameras. So that's one of the main advantage that Sony had, is that they opened the lens mount fairly quickly to third-party lens manufacturers, which helped like coming up with more lens options for shooters, and that's something that's Canon is not doing fully yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important that Sigma also gets a chance to do RF lenses, and we've talked to Yamaki-san, the CEO of Sigma, about this, and was a bit vague about it. So I think there are probably negotiations going on, but they definitely want to do it. Now, from a Canon perspective, of course, it makes sense. I mean, margins are a lot higher on lenses than they are on cameras. So it's hard to give that up. On the other hand, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? You don't sell more lenses if you don't have more users of the camera, but there are not more users of the camera if there are not enough lenses out there, like different lens options. So it's a bit of a tricky point, but I think ultimately it would benefit them to open this, even though they would create their own competition in terms of lenses. But I agree with you. They shouldn't be worried because their own lenses are very good. They might only just, maybe make them a little bit cheaper, so they're a little bit more competitive with Sigma offerings, because Sigma just makes amazing lenses for amazing prices, and I think everybody will agree on that. And it's it's probably harder for them to compete on that.
Like, I upgraded to the free RF zoom f2.8. I still feel the pain, but I'm still happy every time I shoot with these lenses, like they are built like tanks. You know that they are gonna last a very long time. That's a good thing. So they want to have the control over what they release. But on the other end, it's the second, like if we talk about the C400, it's the second camera, cinema EOS camera that come up at a fairly cheap price compared to the features that it gives you. Like the first one was the C70 that came out at a really impressive price tag, and that to this day is still very relevant and an excellent camera. So
are you upgrading? Are you upgrading from the C70 to the C400?
Yeah, I'm on the pre-order queue for the C400. I have two C70s, so I will at least upgrade one to the C400, and I will see if I upgrade the second one. Time will tell. Time will tell. But
did you ever consider the R5C when it came out?
I considered it. Since I'm doing a lot of corporate and commercial stuff, I just wanted cameras with like the same image out of the box with no difference and no matching in post. That's why I went with the same camera model compared to the R5C that had a slight difference and needed some matching in post. That's why I went with two C70s, but I definitely considered the R5C for the 8K modes. But you always come down to that question, do I really need 8K, or am I just...
It's just cool to have.
Yeah, am I just going for it just for the sake of it? Like, it's the same with 4K 120.
In video, I didn't have a client yet that asks for 8K, to be honest. I mean, for photography, it's different, I guess.
Yeah, same. But like, it's the same with 4K 120. Like, none of my clients ever asked me to shoot 4K 120 for any projects yet. I usually stay at 50 or 60 maximum.
I mean, we have yet to review the C400, but what I'm hearing from a good friend of mine who's also a Canon shooter, and he tried it out, and he said it's a bit the image, because it's a new sensor. It looks different from the existing ones because he has a C500 Mark II, C300 Mark III, and so on. And he does a lot of multicam, big stuff for concerts and stuff like that. And he said there's a little bit of it looks different, so you will need to do some work. But he said a more pleasing image because of they are powered from the back or something. So basically the pixel pitch they're closer to each other. So the actual impression of the overall image is a little bit different. I'm very curious to see what he means.
It's a back illuminated sensor, and they moved from the DGO technology from the C70, so it doesn't have a DGO sensor. So from what I saw, it has a little bit less dynamic range compared to the C70. But it looks like a really interesting sensor, and the fact that it's one of the first Canon cameras to really have low light capabilities, we can truly call it a low light camera, because like the third native ISO is 12,800, I guess.
12,800, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that puts it on par with the FX6, which is the same, but it doesn't, like, it has this middle ISO, native ISO 3200, which is very useful because that's actually a problem with the Sony cameras. I mean, it's like a gap in between those 800 and 12,800 that sometimes you run into being forced to use a more noisy ISO in between, because kind of the mixture of NDs and ISO doesn't really make sense with your aperture. So it's very good to have that, the triple native ISO. Yeah.
I can't wait to have it in my hands and give it a try. It's an amazing camera for the price. really it really makes sense in the Canon lineup. I also can't wait to see what accessories Canon or other third-party manufacturers will release for it, because at the moment it really lacks an EVF option. Like Zacuto released their Z Finder adapter for it, but it's quite large. So
let's wait for the Blackmagic viewfinder.
Exactly. Let's see if Canon will allow other manufacturer to have access to the code. And,
I think it should. I mean, if it's really using USB, and my hope is that it's just a normal DisplayPort protocol, and then you should be able to, even attach a normal monitor.
From what I saw from, I guess it's our colleagues from CVP that tested a couple, you actually can't. It was a camera running on beta firmware. So
they tried it. Oh, okay.
But they tried a couple and none was working.
Well, here's hoping that if they don't make their own EVF, it doesn't make sense for them to limit it. But yeah, good. Let's just wrap up the Canon subject here. Last thing we didn't mention about the R1 and the R5 Mark II is that it now supports 24-bit audio and 4 channels. There's probably gonna be a accessory that kind of allows you to get those 2 additional channels in there, I'm assuming. But that's, of course, useful. Unfortunately, it's not 32-bit float, which would be nice. We haven't seen that in a camera yet, but I think it's something manageable.
No, the GH7 has 32-bit float.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that is better. Let's talk about pricing and availability. So the R1 is going to start shipping in November 24 for 8,000 euros or 7,000 pounds. I don't have the dollar price here, but I'm assuming it's something like $8,000 as well. And then we also know about the R5 Mark II, which is going to start shipping in August already. So that's going to be interesting. I still hope that they are going to test the R1 for the Olympics. I'm sure they will, even though it's only shipping in November. And in August, we're going to have already the R5 Mark II for 4,500 pounds or 5,150 euros, probably similar amount in US dollars. So yeah, that's fairly soon. And we hope to get our hands on both we'll test the C400 soon. And we'll probably get our hands on the 5D Mark II soon as well. We'll be back after this message from our sponsor.
Welcome to 1 Minute Tips by Fujifilm and CineD. Let's talk about an exposure practice known as exposing to the right, or ETTR. When you look at a properly exposed log histogram, you will notice that most of the values sit in the lower half of the histogram, meaning that while the image looks pleasing, a lot of that shadow data is more prone to sensor noise. Now, exposing to the right means that you shift the histogram data to the right or intentionally overexpose your image by 1 to 2 stops, moving it away from the noise level while still protecting highlights, with the intention of correcting it back down in post, of course. Now, some may argue that you're not getting the correct contrast and tone with this procedure, and on top of that, you will have to do some additional steps in the color workflow. So, do I recommend you should do it? The short of it is, if you're filming a well-lit scene, chances are, keep your exposure normal. However, filming in a darker location, especially when you have experience with the sensor and how it behaves in post, then I say it's worth taking a shot to get a cleaner final image. Check back with us for more discussions on exposure.
And now, back to the show. All right, let's move on from Canon. There's been another announcement yesterday, which is from DJI. Now, this time, they did not announce a new drone. They did not announce a new gimbal. DJI announced a new lightweight commercial video transmission system called DJI SDR Transmission. And what is it? So basically, they already had their DJI Pro transmission system, which is a transmission system that's really targeted at the higher end. Originally, this was built into the Ronin 4D. I mean, there was like this sandwich plate that you could purchase, which built the video transmission right into that setup. And as I pointed out in my original review of the Ronin 4D, that is one of the greatest things about it, because it's so reliable, it's very little lag. And I tested it in a big concert location alongside a big Terra deck. And because of those 20,000 people in the location, the Terra deck had a lot more problems than the DJI, which actually surprised the guy who was running the director's village and all the multicam stuff. So he purchased the whole system on the spot. He went onto the DJI website and pre-ordered it because it made such a big difference. So of course, DJI has a lot of experience with wireless video transmission because of their drones that needs to work really reliably, and it makes so much sense for them to apply that knowledge and move it into a separate product, which is simply a wireless video transmission system. Now, they had the Pro one, which I said, which is a bit more expensive. And now they are really moving into the lower end and shrinking it and making it available for small or medium-sized productions, and with like a little bit more manageable power consumption and just a smaller footprint. And the cool thing about that technology, like the higher end version, it doesn't work with Wi-Fi. So you look at other budget options on the market, whether it's from Holyland or Axoon or some of the others, many of those are great solutions, right? The only thing they all have in common is that usually they're Wi-Fi based, which brings along a couple of problems. First of all, it's quite prone to Wi-Fi congestion. So if you work in a location where there's a lot of wireless signals, it might easily just lose its connection. Also, the range is not great. You can't go too far away. And in general, anything that is Wi-Fi based is simply a bit less stable because it's just in the same wave band like all the other Wi-Fi stuff. Now this one, the SDR transmission, in this case, actually SDR doesn't stand for a standard dynamic range, as you might think. It stands for, and I didn't know that, software defined radio. So this is something that works on on different bands. So it can hop between the 2.4 gigahertz, the 5.8 gigahertz, and the DFS frequency bands to find the most optimal channel. It transfers 1080p, up to 60 frames per second live feeds with a bit rate of up to 20 megabits per second. Now, that is opposed to what you get with a Wi-Fi signal, which is sometimes like 5, 6, 7 megabits per second. Much lower quality, much lower bit rate. And the delay is as low as 35 milliseconds. So that is manageable. There's always a kind of a delay, but I think 35 milliseconds is quite good for these kinds of systems. Especially if you look at the price of this, which is, they charge, $550 for the transmission combo. That is the receiver and the sender. And you can buy additional receivers, because the cool thing about this technology is it's not really limiting of how many receivers you have. So if you set it to broadcast mode, you can have an unlimited amount of receivers, which is really cool. So it probably just transmits the signal out there, and you can have a lot of different receivers. So very, very useful if you are on a set and you have a director, you have a client, you might have the agency, you just buy a couple of those receivers and just put them in their corner, and they're not going to pry over your shoulder while you're shooting. Very useful. It has SDI, HDMI in, and you can also connect to smartphones and tablets, in addition to having that SDI HDMI connection. Sorry, SDI HDMI out, of course. And you can transmit to a smartphone at the same time. So for example, you could transmit through the receiver, which is connected to a monitor, and you can also transmit to up to 2 smartphones or tablets. So, even if you buy the basic combo, you can, in theory, already have 3 receivers, 2 of them being smartphones or tablets. So that's pretty cool. There's also an integration with the DJI RS series. It supports the Force Mobile technology, virtual joystick, and gimbal recentering functions When paired with a camera, it can support PTP protocol, displaying and adjusting aperture, shutter, ISO, and even triggering the camera's photo and video recording functions through the app. And it can also support CEC control of Sony cameras to bring mirror control mode into play. So very, very nice addition into this market. I think it's, I don't know, what are you using, Jeff, for on-set monitoring?
I'm using the Sweet Flow 500 for a couple of years now. It's been working perfectly, but it's not a Wi-Fi based system. It's kind of a higher end system. Never had an issue. You have 500 feet transmission range, no problems. Latency is okay. HDMI, SDI, and it retails for around 1,000 euros. But it's nice that DJI is going into the lower end or more affordable markets, because their existing system is wouldn't say quite expensive, because it offers you a lot of bang for the buck. It's an incredible system. It works perfectly, but the fact that they are expanding their technology and make it more affordable really makes sense in a way, because not all shooters need all of the bells and whistles of the higher end system. So it's really nice.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting in general to see how much DJI is expanding into different markets, because they're really known to be the drone company. But as we all know, they're facing some challenges, especially in the US right now. They've been very public about, like people trying to motivate people to complain about proposed legislation that would really limit the usage of their drones, specifically because they are Chinese manufacturer in the US. So it looks like they've been diversifying what they're doing. I mean, yes, last week, and we didn't report about it because it's not really relevant for our audience, they introduced a kind of e-bike motor or something. So it's really, they're trying to go into different fields, which of course, from a business perspective, makes a lot of sense. And they are leveraging the technology they already have and kind of just broadening it out for a wider audience. But in general, I mean, this is, of course, very relevant for filmmakers. And also look forward to trying this out. They say that it's working better in tight spaces, and it's also working better in wide spaces with a lot of people, which I can confirm from their Pro solution as opposed to other solutions. And I'm definitely going to try that out. I think it also looks quite cool, I have to say. It's a very nice design. I can see this, a lot of people putting that on their cameras without being ashamed. So yeah.
And do we know if it works with the DJI monitor, like the wireless monitor that they have? I don't remember the name of it.
I think it ties in with their Pro options. I think it does, yeah.
I mean, if you already have it, it makes sense, because otherwise I guess that the monitor itself is more expensive than the DJI SDR entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just look through the presentation if there's anything in there about that. But I remember seeing that somewhere, that it actually supports their existing stuff. Okay, cool.
I mean, that's one of the really great things about DJI, is that most of their products are so good at working with each other, and like once you are in the ecosystem, it just works.
Yeah, it's very, very easy plug and play usually. In terms of availability, I think as usual with most DJI stuff, it's already shipping. So I think they start shipping it today. If you order it today, which is really cool. All right, let's move on to a few more other smaller things that we've reported about this week. We published a video review of the iFootage Anglerfish SL1 200 BNA bicolor LED monolight, which was shot by our dear colleague Graham in LA. So he tested that light. It's a budget COB light. I think it's only, let me just look at the bottom of the article here, $300, just below $300. And yeah, Jeff, I think you dived into this. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting review in the crowded 200 watts COB LED market. Like, everybody has been doing lights this past year. So if you're on the market for a 200 watt bicolor LED light, you have plenty of choice. So it's nice to finally get our hands on one of iFootage's LED lights, which was released, I guess, in January. The Anglerfish lineup is really, at least iFootage markets it as being really color accurate LED lights, and that's what Graham found. Like the readings, the light meter readings in his article really shows it. It's really accurate. The entire ecosystem that they try to build looks to be working perfectly.
I think it's funny how these lights in general become such a commodity. A couple of years ago, it was really hard to find LED lights that were color accurate, and it's now like, you know, people are naming and shaming the ones that are not color accurate, because most of them are, like a lot of them are, and it's I think it's become a very, very crowded market. As you said, there's a lot of options out there. Graham also compared it to a couple other options in the market, and I think it's, you know, we have some from Amaran, which is the cheap brand of aperture. We have some from GVM, we have from Nanlite and Godox, and they all kind of the same price range, $200, $350. So it's, you know, it's not an easy choice. And I think one of the things I would recommend people to look at when they invest into something like that, you know, where do you want to add more lights after that? Because then you should also look what else is there. Because if it's from the same brand, well, sometimes you can operate them all through the same app, even if it's from different brands, but you just should be sure that you don't want to use 10 different apps to control your lights in your studio. So, but yeah, I mean, $300, incredible.
Exactly, like the lighting market starts to look a little bit like the camera market, meaning that once you buy one light and you want all of your lights in the same app, you kind of commit to a brand and you expect them to release more products in the future, to continue to support you. You expect the app to be reliable, to work day in, day out. And I guess one of the first companies that started that trend in a way was Aperture with Sidus Link. So now you, as you said, you have to look up for the other options that the brand gives you and what they are going to release in the future, how they will support you, how is the customer service, because in the price range thing, we are looking at the same ballpark in a way. And in terms of feature, it's pretty much the same. So the main differences are the amount of accessories and the powering options and color accuracy, basically.
Yeah, powering is a good point, of course. But yeah, in general, we're talking about very similar lights. But yeah, good in a good way. I mean, it's all good stuff. All right, let's move on to a little thing that you wrote about. So Topaz Labs, which is mostly known for their upscaling technology. And I think if you've ever been on Facebook or Instagram, you probably could not have been avoiding their ads, which are everywhere. But honestly, I mean, I've been using their Topaz Labs video AI thing for a couple years to upscale low resolution video. And I've tried built-in upscalers of NLEs and also other brands, and I've never had results that were as good as the ones that I got with Topaz. It's slow. It takes ages to upscale because it's just processing intensive. But if you want to upscale 1080p to 4K, you get fairly good results on the normal stuff. When I say normal stuff, I mean, like images of actual things. As soon as you have text or anything like that in the image, it's becoming more difficult because the more detailed it is, the more accurate it needs to be. Text is very unforgiving to upscaling because you can't read it anymore if it's not properly done. But any other stuff works really well. So I've been using that for a couple of years. Now they announced a pro version of their video AI thing, which is, well, first thing I saw, whoa, it's expensive, right? It's like $1,000-something per year. It's a subscription. Apparently, I think it's faster, right? It says increase speeds up to 10 times, which is biggie because the original video AI is very slow and takes a lot of, it just, like you run it 5-minute video, it would take hours to upscale, even on one of the latest.
I mean, the biggest first thing that we probably need to mention is that it's a software now that you install on your computer. You don't work online anymore.
Yeah.
So you can work offline and use as many GPUs as you want to increase render speed up to 10 times. I mean, I guess it really depends on how many GPUs and how fast they are, obviously, you have at your disposal to upscale your footage.
Yeah. In general, I mean, the features are sounding similar. I guess a lot of it is just faster and more accurate. And of course, I mean, having something that's up to 10 times as fast for this kind of stuff makes a big difference, because then you'll probably run this through your entire library of 1080p clips. For example, if you're in, like, I don't know, if you're selling stock footage or something like that, or you just need to reuse old 1080p stuff, it makes a lot of difference if it's so much faster. We now have, I think they have better noise reduction, which is based on machine learning, which is very good. It was already very good. Noise reduction, my first choice would still be DaVinci, because it's something I'm used to and it has a fairly good noise reduction. What are you using for noise reduction?
It depends. It really depends. For very fast turnaround project, DaVinci does a good job, but I'm still using Denoise from...
Yeah.
I don't know from who it is. Need Video. But I think personally still does the best job at denoising.
That's true. But it also is slower.
It's also slower. Like the latest versions improved a lot, but it takes a little bit more time, and it's an extra step compared to the DaVinci built-in tool that you just have to. Yeah. You just crank up a slider and it's done. Yeah. You don't have to open a third-party plugin and analyze your image and stuff.
We had one interesting comment on that Topaz Labs article, which is, you pointed it out to me before. Somebody saying that basically it looks like they invested all their R&D into that new version and kind of neglected the original one, which is much cheaper, of course. I mean, yeah, it could be true, and I wouldn't be surprised. I wonder who's paying $1,000+ for this per year, unless you really need to do this on a constant basis. And I think it's a bit of a niche, and we'll see. Of course, I hope that some of those features will come to the normal version as well, which is much less money. Yeah,
it's a tough sell, but I think they are targeting the high-end market or agencies or enterprise with it, because I mean, one of the highlight feature is the ability to upscale your footage to resolutions up to 24K.
Who needs that?
Who needs 24K? It's very specific. So, except if you are creating content for the Sphere or for Apple Vision Pro, or I don't know. But in that case, you have the budget to invest $1,000.
Yeah, For them, that's nothing. Yeah, of course. All right, let's move on to the last two small topics. So I just want to point out an article that we published from our dear Masha. She wrote a educational piece on and explaining the narrative powers of a fisheye lens with some famous film examples. So some very creative usage of fisheye lenses in feature films and a lot of historical feature films as well, pointing out how it can be used creatively. It's a very, very good article to read. A lot of it is based on one of our MZ courses, The Art of and Science of Lenses by Tal Lazar, which is a very nerdy look into what lenses actually do. And it's kind of dissecting what a lens actually does in order to help you to use different lenses more creatively. It's a bit hard to explain. It's a very technical approach, that course. But after watching it, you're thinking about using lenses in a different way. So I really recommend people watching that course. It's available on MZ, either as an individual course purchase or as part of the MZ Pro subscription, of course. But in general, this article is dealing with a lot of those examples that are from the course. And, she shows examples from more recent and also more historical films and how fisheye lenses can really convey a certain feeling. And you might not have realized that they were used in a specific way. So yeah, that's that. And finally, I just want to point out that it's really now the last chance to get our CineD Special Edition CFexpress Type B card, simply because this will end July 31st. Now, there's a limited stock of those that were kind of made available for us. And the stock is simply running out. I think there's, like last time we checked a couple days ago, there were like 99 pieces left. It's still 179.99 euros or dollars plus tax, depending on where you live, of course. And but they're running out. You will not find any comparable offer in the market with this capacity for that price. And unfortunately, we wanted to extend it, but the stock is almost gone. So if you want it, just head over to this article. We put all the links in this podcast, of course, in the show notes, and this one too. And if you use the code CineD1TB at checkout, you will get the special price, which is I think 40 or 50% off the normal price. So again, this ends July 31st. If you are in need of that 1 terabyte CFexpress Type B card, you have to be quick. All right. Thank you, Jeff. I think we can wrap it up here, unless you want to add something.
Thank you, Nino. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for taking the time.
Have a great summer.
You too.
We can also wish a nice summer to our audience.
I hope you guys, let's hope that all the news are over now and you can just relax and just take a swim. And it never ends. Like middle of the summer, Canon is releasing really cool cameras. What the hell? No, but seriously, I mean, it's going to be an exciting fall. And I think we've had a lot of nice announcements. We'll try and work on as many reviews as possible over the next few weeks to share our thoughts. And yeah, thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else you can get podcasts, and YouTube as well for the video version. And please don't forget to give us a good rating as well. That will really help. Thank you.